Welcome to the 28th Miami Jewish Film Festival, the largest Jewish film festival in the world. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, SAGE, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is Dr. Cassie Feldman. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've chaperoned the March of the Living under SAGE, and I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with Chava Floryn, executive producer from the movie Resilient, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to be moderating the conversation, and there's so many interesting themes and thoughts that we could touch on. And I really want to hear from Chava about some of the aspects of the film that were most touching to her and her most memorable moment. So maybe we'll start there.
Thank you, Cassie. So my most memorable moment, oh my God, there were so many in this film. It's hard to choose just one. Um, Probably my most favorite moment was going down into the South with my son. That was really powerful for me because I'm a mom.
Beautiful to see
Um,
him singing.
to see him singing for all of the volunteers who had come to the Chai Dairy Farm right outside of Kibbutz Be'eri was very beautiful and powerful, and to just feel like we were like enfolded in the healing of, creating something that could be not just helpful for those who were coming to volunteer, but also to give a little light and lift, to Chai, who was the owner of the Chai Dairy Farms. Like, just all of that was just really powerful. And going to the song bath or the song circle with the Hanini group was also one of the highlights of my whole trip because it was just such a holistic and beautiful space that they had created when they sat around singing. Just gave me, I mean, I'm a singer and I wrote a lot of music for this project. And for me, music is so healing, and you hear a lot of music throughout the film because um, Israel is a place where it's just this musical space, and they love to sing and dance and participate in this communal effort. And so, being in that Hineni song circle was pretty powerful and beautiful as well.
And I appreciate your inclusion of the music aspect, including your thoughtfulness about the music you chose for the film, including the opening of the film, because I think that there's so much of healing, especially when it comes to trauma, that's wordless. And I
Yeah,
think that something as creative and as containing as music is powerful, and it's not spoken about enough, especially as people are sort of just in the midst of processing. There's so much to say on it. And I was very touched to see your son singing
yeah,
amongst the trees and among people working. It was so beautiful. And it linked so nicely towards the end of the film too, with that young boy who was sharing such an important and poignant message of what can you do? Like even with just 12 seconds, there's so much that you can offer people and to think about how to mobilize people.
yeah,
One of the things, I was one of the psychologists that responded to the building collapse that took place in Miami here. And one of the things we thought so much about is how do you mobilize people to feel active amidst feeling hopeless? And I think that that's one of the sort of calls for your movie. And it makes me think about one of the questions that came up for me, which is what do you hope people will take away watching this film? I think that there's so many lessons and so many important moments. It's one of those films that it kind of just continues to percolate and things keep coming up for you as you kind of take distance. And I only recently watched the film, so I'm sure for me too, there will be many more moments and messages that stuck with me. But that was one that was very poignant. And I'm wondering for you, as the creator and the brains behind this operation and the executive producer, what you're hoping sticks with people.
I think what I'm hoping is that people have a better understanding of what trauma looks like so that if they are either a victim of PTSD and they may not know it, or they have family members who are dealing with PTSD, they can kind of see the signs. It was really important to me that I explain and show what does trauma look like on a person. Like we had that one scene with Chen when he came to have the brain scan with Dr. Oli Peter, and his hands were moving and his
Yeah.
legs were moving. And I noticed it in the session. I was like, because I'm a somatic healer, so I pay attention to details in a person's body. And I found that really interesting and fascinating. I didn't really know that aspect of it that Dr. Orley had talked about, that he's shaking because he is still in fight or flight.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I actually do have some clients where they have a bit of a tremor
Hmm.
and they're victims of crimes or attacks. And so it gave me a lot of insight as a somatic healer. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense that they're still, in fight or flight. So there's things about the film in terms of really unpacking what the mental health impact is in a war zone. And I think that the whole world could really benefit from understanding what different PTSD symptoms look like, because we're in a post-COVID world
Hmm.
and the whole world is suffering in ways that globally we've never done at the same time before. So for me, this was like I wanted to understand how the Israeli population are moving through difficult times during a war zone in a post-COVID world, because I think they have a lot to teach us in how they move through things. One of the things that I learned over and over while I was there was that it's all about finding purpose and meaning in your story. It's also all about discovering ways to come together as a peoplehood, as a group. It's why I'm so passionate about wanting this film to be seen in theaters, because I believe that so much of our healing is done in a community setting.
Hmm.
And I hope that people take a lot of these lessons, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, whether they're from Israel or they're Americans or they're from other parts of the world. These are universal lessons that we can all learn in terms of how to move through tough times and how to survive crisis.
Absolutely. And I definitely was touched by your goal of trying to educate amidst telling a story and having people sort of just come on a journey with you for the duration of the film. But there was an educative component of it in a really nice way. It didn't feel like overly explanatory and sort of an educational way. It felt just like you were sharing a lot of very important messages that I think stick with and resonate with so many people. I mean, there's this idea of the pervasiveness of trauma. There's that book, The Everywhereness of Trauma. And I do think that through this sort of vehicle of looking at sort of the impact of the war, you're sharing important messages that are applicable to everyone. Certainly, when you highlighted that maybe the goal isn't necessarily to return to pre-morbid functioning, but understand how trauma sort of fragments someone's reality. And then you have to integrate what seemingly doesn't fit into your narrative or your worldview, and also re-engage with the capacity to play. And that's sort of a marker of health. I think there are so many important themes that you have in there, and I think you really made them applicable to people. So I agree with you. I think that the legacy of this project is so much more than let's sort of give space to acknowledge the impact of this war, which is critically important from a historical perspective, but more broadly from a societal perspective, what can we teach people about how to sort of be aware of what we need and how to address what we need? Because as you said, in a post-COVID world, we all have been vicariously traumatized, whether it's the pandemic and certain losses or being part of the Jewish community and the runoff of this war and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think also for Americans, I mean, I talk to Americans and I speak to Israelis or Israeli American, American Israelis who are living in Israel. And, each demographic really handles their trauma differently.
Mhm.
Those Jews who are living outside of Israel are dealing with a very different kind of trauma and a very different kind of fear and an escalation of fear as a result of feeling so unseen and, you know, this
Mhm.
perpetual anti-Semitism causes a lot of concern and trepidation. And so, and then you have then you have Israelis who are kind of used to being in a war zone.
Mhm.
And so the way that they handle things are also with a little bit more like, and we talked about this in the film when I interviewed Orr, and he said, "Yeah, I thought it would be safe to go back to Sderot." And I was like, "How could it be safe? Like,
Right.
120,000 missiles have hit that city in the last decade. Like, what and what planet do you think that that's safe?" And he's like, "Yeah, I guess that doesn't make so that doesn't make so much sense, you know." But that's how Israelis do things. You know, they just keep plowing through, they just keep going. They don't stop for a second I mean, look, this morning, I woke up this morning, I went to work and checked my phone. There's a barrage of missiles in the middle of Tel Aviv, in the middle of central Israel.
And your kids are in Tel Aviv.
My kids are several blocks away to where the Ramat Gan mall is. They got shrapnel blown up in that space, you know. And I stopped for a second, and I'm like, let's just make sure everyone's okay. Texting, texting, texting. Everyone, proof of life, everyone, you know. And this is a daily for a lot of us who are living with family members overseas. And it's not just in the Jewish community. I know this is a problem within the Palestinian community as well. So everyone's feeling this war on both sides, and that's something that I want everyone to remember that this is a human story. And like what Mati had said, Mati Shoshani, who had so beautifully said, the reason why people care so much about what happens to Israel is because it proves that we're here for a reason. And when we become more in tune with what our reason is, no matter what religious affiliation you are, whatever your however you identify yourself, when you become more clear about your vision and your mission and your purpose, you become less anxious. You become more in tune with the universe, with those around you who are the other. It becomes less about trying to figure out how to like become something. You're already something. You already have a sense of that. And to me, that's so important, especially in American culture where there's so much, divisiveness,
Mhm.
and everyone's trying to, climb the make me, climb that ladder of like just I want to be seen so badly, but being seen starts in here. And
Mhm.
if we can figure out ways to become more in tune with what goes on in here, then everything else will start to become more holistic and more dynamic and more, less broken, you know?
Which is an important message of your film. I don't know that that necessarily was your intention when you were putting the film together to begin with, but it is certainly a message that comes through and is critical. And absolutely, it's a challenging thing to hold space for the multiplicity of experience, but it's critically important. Like, how can we honor what we're feeling, but also honor what other people are feeling,
Yeah.
um, and be more in tune not only with ourselves, but with others? And it harkens back to what you were saying about the power of community and how transformative and healing that can be. I know like at this moment in time, there's just like so much franticness about trying to understand the Jewish experience. I'm part of a group of therapists that are putting together a protocol about how to address like the trauma of the Jewish experience, which, as you said, it's different if you're a Jew in the diaspora versus in Israel, it looks very different. But I think one of the things that we're seeing is that there is a healing aspect of community. And I think that that's another important point of your film, which is there's so much power and connectedness in community, even amidst facing ultimate challenges. And I think that that's one thing for people really to take away, thinking about how to develop and cultivate and lean into community in places that feel safe.
I also want to just say community is however you define it. you know we were going into Israel to look at the Israeli population, but just on a more wider level, like community is how you choose to create that space with others. So it doesn't necessarily mean that community has to be with like-minded individuals. It's about sharing space with the collective and in any way
Absolutely.
that you choose to create that.
I think it's an important clarification. I'm so glad you said that. This is
Mhm.
jumping a little bit, but we were talking a bit about just all that you learned from the the Israeli community and being there and present at all these important locations where so much took place from a felt and historical perspective, and then also having the awareness and background of what it means to be a Jewish person in America. And I think one of the things for me as just like a human and a psychologist and having friends in Israel that I'm always grappling with is that fine line between Israeli resilience and also where there may be avoidance. And I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts or conclusions. I don't know that I have any conclusions, but just any musings about that dichotomy, because I think about it often. Sometimes when there's that pick up your bootstraps and move on mentality, I'm like, that's amazing. That's resilient. And then part of me, I'm like, are you acknowledging everything you need to be acknowledging? Like, I can't totally tell. So I kind of want to turn it over to you and hear your thoughts about that dichotomy.
I mean, we talk about this in the film, because, and I think in that there was that one spot right after I was in Hostage Square, and I was sitting on the tree with Monty Shoshani, and he said to me, he goes, "What about you?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
I love the Israeli population because sometimes, because you really do teach us how to move through hard things, but sometimes it's like, I say this in the film, it's too much, meaning like you almost don't acknowledge the situation that you're in enough to be able to change and shift it.
And
And, I talked a little bit about this in the beginning of the film when I went to Tel Aviv and I saw all those teddy bears that were all around. And, and I talked about how I was with my daughter and we're walking through and I'm just like this, like I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was
I've had that
shocking to me.
experience as well, walking with someone through Tel Aviv for the first time and seeing those teddy bears and being struck by it and what it means. And then the other person that I'm walking with is totally desensitized. And I think
Right.
a good example in the film of the scab. Like there's something about the scab and the formation of the scab that's protective and adaptive, but then
Yeah.
also there's like the numbing
So
effect.
so necessary and at the same time also there's a double-edged sword to being resilient in some ways is that you can get a little too hard and then you lose your sense of softness of how to, you know, think about the bigger picture. And
Mhm.
that to me is a danger, a dangerous zone that we have to be really careful with.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things that I kind of noticed more than anything was, as you were saying, just walking through the streets in Tel Aviv and me noticing all these moments of the war being so there and noticing the faces walking through the street of the population that looked bereaved. No
Mhm.
one looked, everyone looks like, whoa, we just been through a thing. Everyone looks super, super bereaved. And at the same time, also everyone they're off, they're
Mhm.
going, they're doing, they're focused. There's a focus there that is so incredibly courageous and something that I admire. And at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but what about taking a minute and just like actually processing these feelings, everybody? Because this is huge. So
Yeah.
I think there's a fine line, and it's about, really just again, we go back to, okay, well, then you need to find spaces, safe spaces to do that. And there are moments in the film when like I'm in Hostage Square and it's like that's a safe space. That is the place that people will go at the end of their workday to process this incredibly difficult time, right? And so you're not going to do it 24/7. And it's like grief. That's what grief is. And I talk about this in the film that grief is like wearing a backpack of rocks because there are some days that it feels so heavy and then you just can't walk one more minute. And then there are some days where like, oh, I've been doing this for a while. This feels, I can still go, I can still get through the next moment. And so it's like, I remember thinking like after my father passed away, we're a family with a great, phenomenal sense of humor. That didn't really come through in this film because it wasn't that kind of thing. But we do have an incredible sense of humor, the whole family. I'm one of seven brothers and sisters. And we all sat around during Shiva. And I remember thinking to myself, how will we ever laugh again? Because it's like our elixir. Like that's how we get through life. Like I couldn't imagine laughing. And of course, you know, within a few moments of us being together, because we're just a silly, bunch, we're laughing. And I remember thinking in that moment that I'm sitting around with my siblings after having gone through this horrible thing. And I'm thinking, while we can laugh during this. And there's something about being human that is so complex that you can be in severe pain and still smile. It's just the way that we're all wired. It's the gift of being human. But we
So,
forget that. We think, oh, it's always going to be terrible, or we're always going to cry. And the fear that a lot of people have, and I'm sure you see this as a therapist, is, well, what if I start crying and then I don't stop? And the
mhm.
one thing I tell my patients all the time is most people die from never feeling anything. No one ever died from feeling something.
I think it's interesting for me to hear you talk about mourning, because one of the things that I've been thinking so much about with Shiva and mourning is it offers us this framework that contains us and gives us sort of structure of how to approach grief and and a difficult time, right? There's community set in place, there's like comfort, there's solidarity, there's dedicated space to mourn. It's not like burying, it goes and gets buried and goes underground. But there's this weird way with the war, there is this ongoing grief and this ongoing mourning. And I guess I'm curious to know your perspective on just sort of what has felt the most supportive of for people, especially in Israel right now. I think, October 7th happened, and then it in some ways still feels like October 7th.
Yeah,
All of
we're
these
still
months
in it.
pass. There's like insult on
Yeah.
injury, there's loss on loss, there's all of these things happening. And it's not like a demarcated period of time where it's like we grieve and it's over. People were going to several funerals a day, and it transforms completely. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts and impressions on mourning and what you took away and learned just with this different kind of grief amidst ongoing war. It's its own beast.
It's its own beast. And the one, probably what, actually, I told you I had like two of my favorite moments, which was the song circle and the farm, but there was a third favorite, big favorite. And this will go into the answer to your question. It might be even my top. It's in the top. It's definitely the top range. But going with Ari Dabular to the hotels and delivering these teddy bears to the children and to the refugees. Oh my God! It was so powerful to be able to feel like we're doing something because at some point, what Ari said was, we did everything we could for everyone there. There was only so much we can do. They needed supplies and food and clothing and just everything. And so at first, when the war first started, it was like everyone's just organizing things and delivering as much as they can to the refugees. But then it was like, wait, what about their mental state? What about creating some space for them to feel like someone is caring about them enough to show up and just deliver these cute dolls? And it started off first with these teddy bears that were being he walked around with these gigantic teddy bears and he was just letting people hug them. And that's how Operation Teddy Bear, did get started. And we talked about that in the film. But that was so beautiful. And the thing that I learned about that experience was that you have to get outside of yourself when you're in perpetual mourning. And
Mhm.
you have to give. You have to show up for others because it really does help your own grief.
Take you
And
out of your own
um,
experience.
yeah, there has to be that there has to be asking for help as much as giving the help. There has to be this exchange
Mhm.
consistently happening within the communities, I think.
I think that that's a very important point, and you're touching on something that I wanted to ask you, which is what is something this you're obviously familiar to grief. You're a somatic healer. You are no stranger to pain personally and also professionally. But I was going to ask you what's something new that you learned about transforming pain and making meaning. And I think that this is that answer that there has to be an acknowledgement of your experience and a protection and a processing of it, but also a taking yourself out of your own experience
Yeah.
and showing up for someone else to contextualize. I think that's really important. And I think, I mean, there are recent books that talk about physicians that are burnt out, and I'm blanking on the name, it'll come to me, but they talk about the importance of when you think that you're burnt out and you have to like shield yourself and protect space. Actually, what they found is the anecdote is to take yourself out of your own experience and be generous and generative and thoughtful about other people's experience. So I think it's a a matter of striking the right balance. And I think that that's very important. It's important for clinicians to know. I think it's important for the general public to know too.
And I think also it's about, rewiring the brain. There's a rewiring that has to happen after a huge loss because you're used to, like I talked about this in the film, you're used to seeing it one way, and then all of a sudden life is just thrown at you and you have to like get used to a whole new little package of what you originally thought it was going to be, right? And so there's a rewiring that happens whether you want it to or not. But to be effective in where your rewiring isn't making you go backwards, but instead having post growth, post traumatic growth versus post traumatic trauma, because trauma is a wound that just doesn't get healed. You want to be in post traumatic growth, space. And to be in post traumatic growth, you've got to give yourself opportunities to experience things you've never experienced before. And so, and I did talk a little bit about this in terms of, what I learned when I was on my way to Israel a few trips ago from this gentleman who had survived the Yom Kippur War. And he said he didn't get any PTSD because he went on an adventure. And what happened in that to his brain was that he was actually rewiring it with new experiences. And you hear a lot about this. I interviewed so many Israelis who had talked about how, when they finish their service in the military, they all go traveling all around the world because they're trying to rewire and create new experiences, which then informs their post-traumatic growth. And that to me was so probably the one thing that I gained the most out of in my own trip of going because like the rest of the world who were affected by this war, I was incredibly affected emotionally, and my grief was at a very all-time high. Like I was actually worried that I was slipping into a severe depression. And I wasn't planning on going on this trip. This was a very last minute decision. Um, to give you some background of how it even got started was that I started a nonprofit several days after October 7th for families who either their children live overseas and need support, or for survivors who have come to the Los Angeles area and just needed support post October 7th. We started a community. It's called the Gibor Circle, and the community offered all different kinds of in-person events. That was my in just sort of like what I thought was, a good idea, my instinct. And we started with a WhatsApp group, very much what they had talked about there. I was like, wow, I'm doing this all right. I didn't even know. It's amazing. So we had this WhatsApp group and we had, over 100 people that are participating. And we regularly get together for events. Um, we had just had a huge full day, beautiful event in a beautiful home with catered meals and classes, and it was like a full day, like retreat. And we offered families everything from writing to music, self-defense classes, yoga, meditation, breath work, art. I mean, it was just like a full day of like really just you could do nothing or you could do everything. It just was all dependent upon you. And we have a lot of volunteers who are therapists that are part of this community as well. So it was a Thursday, and one of my therapists who was supposed to lead the men's group on Tuesday night said, I can't make it. You're going to have to get me a fill-in. I'm going to Israel on a mental health mission. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. He's like, you should be on that mission. I was like, yeah, you're leaving on Thursday or Wednesday. It's like almost Friday. I'm like, I don't know how I would even get that together. And then it turned out that I actually knew the woman who was putting it on, and she knew me, and she's like, I'm saving a spot for you. Book your ticket. I'm like, okay, I'll book my ticket. So I booked my ticket Saturday night to leave that Wednesday. Tuesday morning, my filmmaking spidey senses just started going off, and I was like, I'm going to see so much and I'm going to learn so much, and the world needs to see what I'm about to learn. And so within 24 hours, I had had the film ready to, like, I had had a group waiting for me, an incredible DP who himself had, like I had shared in the film, had just gotten out of military reserves, father of five. And for the next 2 weeks, we filmed all over Israel. Somehow or other, within 24 hours, I had the initial part of the trip funded and the shoot, the shoot funded. I had no idea how I was going to raise the rest of the funding at all. I just figured like this will all happen the way it's supposed to happen. And if it doesn't happen, I tried. That's how I figured it. Um, but somehow or other, our community really showed up for this, and they really believed in the project. And my producer, Howard Rosenman, an Oscar-winning producer, really believes in the project. And so we just, I don't know, it's like I just rode this wave, and I just felt like in my gut, this is what we needed to create.
It's amazing that it came together so quickly and that it was sort of just from one day to the next, just came to fruition. It's
Yeah,
remarkable.
yeah.
Maybe in the time that we have left, because we're talking about the process of the film and putting things together, what were challenges that emerged putting it together aside from funding is always a challenge when it comes to the film world. But I'm just
Um,
curious to know, yes, more about putting it together and how if maybe something didn't make it in that was meaningful to you that you wish had, or something that you wish you could add, anything about the process that sort of stands out to you.
there were a few things I wish I could have put in that we just didn't get in, but for the most part, everything that I put in, I'm pretty proud of. Um, I have the most amazing team of people that I'm surrounded by, from our incredible assistant editor, Jamal Jackson, to our producer, Howard Rosenman, to our DPs, Greg Starr and David Dobular and Danny Knust, and our incredible music department, Jason Stair, and our music score film. I mean, he's such a brilliant guy. Josh Earhart. I mean, I just got so lucky with the most incredible people. And some of the, missing pieces of music came from Artlist, which is this incredible music library out of Israel. So I just got so lucky with surrounding myself with really the best and brightest. And I feel like incredibly blessed to be with this amazing, amazing team of people. And then this film would never have happened if it wasn't for the Jewish community of Los Angeles. Like everybody stepped up in a way to help us get it done.
I was
So
thinking
many
the timing is
organizations.
amazing. The turnaround time is unbelievable.
Really truly, like everybody really participated with so much love. I mean, this is like I really don't feel at all like I'm part of this. I feel like I'm just the channel. I don't feel like I'm the one. I feel like I'm just the channel, and that this is such a collective like love from everybody coming together to really tell these stories and to hold space for those who needed it. Obviously there's so many more stories, so
Sure.
many more. And I wish I could have included all of them. And maybe one day this will be a series and then I can. But there's still a lot that I would love to unpack. The region is complicated, and the war is complicated. So and there are so many people affected by it on both sides of the aisle. So yeah, it's definitely been a labor of love, and one that I just felt in my gut needed to be told.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you were able to tell it and that you were able to make it on that trip and put a team together and to be the vessel or the channel. Maybe one more question and then I'll kind of conclude and offer a wrap up. But I'm so glad we got to have this conversation today. One of the things that you asked people in the film was about how they were taking care of themselves and how they were coping. And you were very honest and transparent and included a lot of your own voice and your own narrative and your own history when you go on a trip like this and you're going to a region where there's so much pain, so much unmetabolized, so much actively being processed, you are in the middle of a war zone. You feel it obviously in your body, in your heart, in your mind. Sometimes the coming back part and the processing is interesting. I'm just curious for you, your process, because there is the vicarious traumatization as well. There's this beautiful, meaningful aspect of you're doing something creative and it's healing, but also you're affected and you're holding so much and you're so attuned and aware of other people's emotional experience. What was it like for you coming back for the trip, re-entering home life? Because it's hard sometimes. You know, someone's like, what do you want for dinner? Chicken or steak? You're like, it doesn't matter. I was just in a war zone. Like certain things just don't feel meaningful. And on the flip side, sometimes it can feel even more meaningful and you connect even more with those things. I'm just curious for you what the coming back process has been like, how you've
Yeah.
been taking care of yourself, like how you've been coping.
Um, it's been very hard. I'm not gonna lie. This has been the hardest thing I've ever done, emotionally. I'm in the editing room every day since February. It is now December. So we're talking sitting with a war every single day for hours on end. So it wasn't just being there for the 2 weeks. It's being there for the 2 weeks and then sitting with these stories every single day. So I would say about 5 or 6 weeks ago, maybe 7 weeks ago, it was right before the holiday season, the Jewish holiday season, and I was a shell of a person. I was not doing well at all, and I recognized a lot of because I'm a survivor of PTSD. I was recognizing some of these things, and I was just like, well, something is just not working. And it's interesting because it was also kind of happening in my in my editing bay as well. Like I was losing I was having all these complications with our technology. I was losing like 20 hours of footage that I had like 20 hours of edits that all of a sudden just evaporated. It was like God was like pushing me to the wall and was like, you've got to take care of yourself because no one's going to do it for you. And I had my like last screening, like second to last screening with Howard, and I fell apart because it wasn't translating. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. There was a lot of mistakes that I had made. I was rushing it. I felt emotionally spent. I was done. Like emotionally, I was done. I was giving so much to so many things and so many people, and I couldn't go any further. And it was actually affecting the project. Like everything was not working. It was like one big cluster. It was bad. So I decided I was going to completely unplug from the project. It didn't matter. I was supposed to get into this one film festival. I had to give up on it. And I was like, okay, it doesn't even matter because this is a film about mental health and I'm not taking
I
care of my
maxed
mental health.
out. Yeah.
So I went into like a major, like 3 week grind of just recalibrating myself. And I was doing all the things. I was showing up to myself. I was going to the beach. I was meditating. I was working out like gently, taking walks, doing nothing, getting massages, self-care, calling my therapist, doing my
Putting
energy
yourself back online.
really putting myself back online and just not thinking about the story at all. And after 3 weeks of doing this journaling, like all the things, music, playing in my piano room and just singing, all the things. After 3 weeks of that, I went back into the editing room. I opened up the computer and I was like, okay, I got
I
it.
can
And
do this.
I finished it up. And I felt like I was back online. I felt myself again. My energy level went from here to here. Like it was all about, I think we forget that we're all energetic beings and that we all operate from different frequencies. There's low frequency, which is like you're just so depressed and out of life force. And there's high frequency, which is you are busting with life force. It's interesting that you talked about how you were a therapist during the collapse of that building in Miami. Actually, that week, my best friend in the world, shout out to Nomi, um, her aunt was in that building.
Mm.
And on the morning that her aunt was in that building and the building collapsed and she lost her aunt and her uncle, um, I was in the hospital with my husband who was having a massive heart attack. And for those 2 weeks, every single day, the two of us were calling each other, and we were each other's lifeline during that really tough time. And so it's like, I don't know whether my husband's going to survive. She doesn't know whether her aunt and uncle are going to make it. I mean, we're both just sort of like trying to figure out how to move through. And every
Mhm.
time I would feel like, oh my God, I can't go one more minute further, she'd hype me up. And every time she would feel like she can't go further, I'd hype her up.
Well,
And
that level of uncertainty is killer, but that community, it's containing.
about having that person or that group of people who can give you what you need when you can't do it any longer. And that's what we saw with one family, right? That organization that brings people who are victims of terror together to find ways to cope, because not everyone understands when you've been through something like this. But
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
yeah,
appreciate you so much being forthcoming and sharing about your experience because I think there's so much and the reason I ask you is I think that there's so much the community can learn
yeah.
um, just from the impact of listening to stories. Like it can be so important to share testimony and bear witness and connect with what's happening. And it's also, I think, an important lesson to teach people it's okay to take a step away. You don't always need to be plugged into everything every moment to remain compassionate, and you can't pour from an empty kettle, which are, yes, often we learn these things the hard way. We talk a lot about the building collapse and the things we did well and the things we did wrong. And I think in a moment of uncertainty or anxiety, as you described, there's this kind of life force energy, almost like manic energy, where it's the manic defense. You want to do something to ward off against bad feelings, and there can be a lot of productivity in that, but there definitely needs to be that protected space of processing. And I think it's sometimes hard to connect with what you need in a moment when you're feeling all of that high vibration energy, but definitely protecting yourself and taking space is important. I think it's an important lesson for us to share with the community and those watching as well,
But
knowing
one
when
of
to
the
take
things
that.
which I didn't really like talk about in the film, but that we did learn when we were on this mission was when we interviewed Hinda Schreiber, who's the head of Orla Nefesh, which is an organization that leads they're the social workers who they have an organization that help people in the Jerusalem area. And she was saying that one of the things they're really seeing more than anything is that the therapists are so burnt out. And so a lot of what we need to do for the communities in Israel is not just supporting those who need therapists, but also supporting the therapists, because they themselves are also dealing with, holding space for so many people, and also they're also in a war zone. So it's like a double-edged sword as
For
well.
sure. Like similarly to being the pandemic and COVID, it's like you're simultaneously Sherpaing people and helping them process while you're also coping with something. It's a very challenging position to be in, and there definitely does need to be healing for the healers. It's a
Yeah.
challenge. It's a challenge right now. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was beautiful and it was enlightening, and there's so many more things I'm sure we can speak about. And to conclude the interview, I'll say thank you, Chava, so much for joining us. And once again, thank you to everyone here, all of our members, sponsors, community partners, volunteers, all of the film lovers that have joined, and especially presenting sponsors SAGE, the Center for Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all of these years. And thank you to the audience for participating in the 28th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.